Fusion is a concept in Steven Universe with a bunch of firsts. Besides Garnet from the very beginning, it's first seen at all with Opal and Giant Woman, first seen between multiple gems in Fusion cuisine, first seen in a long-term situation with both Garnet and Malachite, and the list goes on. But out of all of those, the most impactful reveal regarding Fusion is Steven's ability to perform it at all, which comes in my personal favorite out of all of those episodes mentioned, Alone Together, and that's what we're talking about today. In this video, we're going to go through all 11 minutes of some of the most beautiful animation that the series ever produced, and discuss how, while also having some stunning shots and color choices, Alone Together takes a look into the implications of Steven and Connie's fusion in a way that still has me thinking about it nearly 9 years later.
Aw, come on, it's Steven. Who knows what's gonna happen?
The episode opens up to one of the most fun scenes of the show's first season, with Steven dancing with his team as they try to get Fusion to work for him. There are a ton of things to like about this fairly short season opener, as besides just having a fantastic backing track, something that it shares with the entirety of this episode by the way, it's also just really great to watch all the shenanigans that unfold as a result of Steven failing to keep up with the movements of the other crystal gems, either because of his lack of coordination, the lack of height, or just the fact that he has bones. I think a really interesting part of this scene that's only possible to catch if you've seen future episodes of the show is that despite the fact that the point of this scene is to somewhat plant the seed of doubt in Steven and the audience's head that his fleshy body might not let him fuse, Garnet's soon-to-be revealed future vision would obviously show her possible futures where he did indeed fuse, likely with both Connie and with the other gems, as her comment about being confident in his ability to do it was likely more than just a guess. After this quick opener that gets the idea of Steven trying to fuse into the audience's head, we cut to this absolutely visually stunning scene of Steven and Connie on the beach against a wonderful purple background, a purple that serves as the mix of the pair's clothing. The conversation that follows has some writing that's almost as beautiful as everything else in this scene, as Steven describes his troubles fusing, while Connie simply admires his ability to even attempt dancing with the gems, giving an anecdote about her anxiety preventing her from attending her school's dance. For pretty much all 6 seasons of the show, Connie is one of the most put together and functional characters in the series, with her only real struggle being her confidence within herself to be herself, something that Steven has no issues with, at least from a social perspective, and at least during this first season. Steven eventually, and adorably, convinces Connie to dance along with him to the title track of the episode, and man is this scene great. This episode, just like the series, features a ton of dancing, and every single example of it works so thematically well. Here, for example, I really love how they start with the pair dancing together, then breaking off to do their own thing, before coming back together again, keeping their own identity while still having fun together. Anyway, eventually, once the pair come together again, their laughs of joy begin to fuse together as their bodies do the same. As we get introduced to Savani for the first time, I'm going to go ahead and go through all the things about them that remain true throughout this entire episode, so I don't have to go through them over and over and over again. Instead, you can just watch these same clips over and over and over again while I talk about them. First of all, in both of my other videos about Stevani episodes, I've already talked about this, but the voice acting of AJ Michalka to both portray this really fun character having a ton of fun, while also using inflections to demonstrate which of their two components are speaking, is just unreal in how well they pull it off. The other thing I want to talk about before moving on is Stevani's design, which while I do think that compared to episodes like Jungle Moon, this is the worst the character ever looks, which is probably a good thing for a character's first appearance, I still really like how the character is portrayed here, as there are clear bits of both Steven and Connie. While this design does have to lean a bit more feminine and humanoid than likely makes canonical sense in order for the Kevin plot later in this one to make any sense at all, it's still just too much fun to watch them tower over everybody in this episode, and watching them run around is just a treat. Anyway, finally getting onto the rest of Stevonnie's first adventure, the fusion runs off to the beach house to show themselves off to Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, to mixed results. How specific about what part of a relationship Stevonnie is a metaphor for is up for each person to interpret, but I don't think that this is a breezy situation where the main interpretation is that this has to be about physical relations. Anyway, moving on before every single comment is about that tiny line, each of the 3 crystal gems has a different reaction to Stevonnie. As Amethyst is amazed and wants to know how they feel, Pearl politely thinks it's inappropriate and that the pair should take it slower, and Garnet is overjoyed, eventually sending the pair to go out and enjoy the experience that is Stevonnie. As this episode goes on, Stevonnie will ultimately become kind of a dual metaphor for 2 parts of growing up that are linked together, and the side of it that is about one's first relationship is best illustrated here, as everybody that Steven and Connie seem to approach as Stevonnie has a different opinion about how they should handle it. Ultimately though, they take the advice of Garnet and give us one of the best shots of the show's first season as they run around throughout the Purple Night. While somehow this isn't even the best use of color in this episode, as we'll get to that in a second, every single moment of Stevonnie exploring their new self is elegantly cinematically stunning, with the animation and music coming together to create such a joyous scene. Coming out of this one, we get to the funniest part of the episode, as Sadie and Lars are both stunned into silence by Stevonnie's presence, as the fusion unknowingly captivates both employees. This is the first example of something else I'll talk about towards the end of the episode, but the idea of Stevonnie getting their donut for free isn't exactly just a gag. Moving on, as Stevonnie sits on the bench, eating both donuts they bought for themselves, the character finally takes a moment to process what they've done and who they are. Something that nearly splits the pair up as Steven seemingly begins to struggle in their current configuration. Fortunately, before that can happen, Stevonnie is invited by a nervous sour cream to a rave, which the fusion, whose existence is based on dancing, obviously accepts, taking us to the location that houses the rest of the episode. Before even getting to the action at the club, let's quickly talk about all the different ways that the aesthetics of this place absolutely rule. From the color choices here that genuinely create a scene that feels like nothing else in the series, to fun details like Sour Cream DJing with Game Boys, to the soundtrack of his set matching whoever is dancing, all comes together to make this location stand out so stinking well, and completely sets the vibe for the introspective scene to come. During Stevonnie's first dance, the episode does a fantastic job in blending together the perspective of the fusion, whose components think are absolutely killing it, while also accurately depicting the actions of the dance, which definitely seems like what 2 preteens would think people dance like at a rave. At the end of this sequence, we get to the part of the episode that I think is somehow even more impressive than everything else I've raved about for the last 8 minutes or so, being how this episode depicts Connie's anxiety seeping back into the fusion. The surrealist abstractions of figures watching and looking down upon Stevonnie as the character's heart races makes for such a powerfully well done scene, ending with the fusion making a bubble around themselves and not in a fun Steven bubble type of way. Before the bubble can even begin to help them calm down, the barrier they've built around themselves lets in an intruder, and the de facto physical representation of this episode's antagonist, Kevin. And in the same way that somebody can say they are a big fan of Adventure Time's Lich without anybody assuming that they approve the extinction of life on Earth, I really like Kevin in this episode. Besides just having some lines in here that are just so awful that I can't help from laughing.
Why should I?
Because we're angels walking among garbage people.
He's also just the perfect character to bounce off the innocent joy that is Stevonnie, as well as playing into the negative side of young romance. minutes. Every line spoken by Kevin feels so jerkish, as he tries to get Stevonnie to just give in and dance, painfully unaware of both how uncomfortable his dream partner is even before Kevin shows up, and how much Stevonnie genuinely despises his existence. The soundtrack during both his dance and the following scenes is great at showing this too, as it all becomes so overwhelming for the audience, just like how it's so overbearing for Steven and Connie. Eventually, all of this gets to the fusion, who uses their last moments of togetherness to simultaneously embarrass Kevin, while also finally getting back to what caused them to fuse together, as they dance without care of what others think. The delirious joy of our pair after all of this is over as the episode ends feels so perfectly disorientating for the rest of the episode, as, without any words being spoken, the only thing emanating from the pair is pure happiness. When asked about Stevonnie, Rebecca Sugar describes the fusion as a metaphor for all the terrifying firsts in a relationship, and what it feels like to hit puberty and suddenly find yourself with the body of an adult. How quickly that happens, how it feels to have a new power over people, or to suddenly find yourself objectified, all for seemingly no reason since you're still just you. To break down the first half of this quote, Stevonnie representing a relationship is pretty obvious given the whole fusion thing, as every fusion represents a type of relationship, although obviously not all are romantic. Besides just the reactions of the other crystal gems that I talked about before, the title of this episode reflects the reality of Steven and Connie throughout this episode, as while they are able to reach such joyous highs when they are fully connected, they become so intertwined that they begin to lose themselves, something that leads the pair to begin feeling alone, albeit together. The pair, just like many first relationships, had gotten too connected too quickly, not developing their dynamic in a healthy way along the way, which ultimately results in dysfunction at the first sign of trouble. While this side of the metaphor is neat and all, I think that Stevonnie having to deal with being treated as somebody much older than either of their components is by far my favorite part of the episode. Stevonnie represents an exaggerated version of the feeling that you go from being an innocent little kid to a young adult bare to the ways of the world instantaneously, as they are forced to deal with how people treat you, especially if you are as conventionally attractive as Stevonnie. And this is where the fact that Stevonnie's design is a little bit illogical begins to make sense, as the character looking like they do creates this feeling of every single character treating them differently than they would Steven or Connie. And while there is obviously a difference in the actions of Sour Cream, Lars, and Sadie versus Kevin, both sets of characters treat Stevonnie as something other than a person, which just adds to the loneliness alluded to in this episode's title. The only times that Stevonnie ever truly feels uncomfortable in this episode is when the character is together with other people, as ultimately nothing is more isolating than everybody just staring. This isolation is only solved by the fusion breaking apart, as once Stevonnie is once again Steven and Connie, it's impossible for everybody to be staring at just one person when the two of them are looking at each other, goofily dancing along together just like they did right before they fused. Out of all the 11-minute outings that Steven Universe produced, very few go by as quickly as Alone Together, as the show delivers one of its most poignant metaphors with a euphony of beautiful backgrounds, stunning color palettes, dynamic shots, and just a litany of wonderful little moments that all string together to make Stevonnie's debut one to remember. Anyway, that's about it for me. Thank you so much to anybody who's checked out anything I've made in the last couple of weeks, including that way too long Steven Universe movie video from 2 weeks ago, as it genuinely means a ridiculous amount to me. If you're wondering what the rest of this year looks like on this channel, the current plan for December is to just do 5 relatively simple episode breakdowns, including the follow-up to this episode, so I can go and get ahead on some of the larger projects I want to do next year, including a giant Steven Universe future review. If you want to see me complain about copyright and pretty much nothing else, you can find my Twitter somewhere in the description. But either Either way, this has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in a week for a video on an episode of the other 2010s Cartoon Network show that I pretty much only cover. Thanks for watching.